Kale had always believed that the stars would feel different when seen up close. Back on Earth, they looked small and distant, tiny lights scattered across the night sky. But now, standing inside the cold, metallic hold of an alien transport ship, he saw them through a narrow observation window, and they felt closer than ever, yet more unreachable. He was no longer a soldier. At least, that was what everyone around him believed. The last thing he remembered clearly was the battle near the border colony. Human forces had tried to hold their position against the Aurelian fleet, a powerful alien empire known for its discipline and ancient traditions. Humans were new to the galaxy, still learning the rules, still misunderstood by older civilizations. The battle had ended quickly. Aurelian ships moved with precise coordination, cutting through human defenses without hesitation. Kal had survived, but survival had come at a cost. Now he wore a simple gray band around his wrist. It marked him as property. The hold was quiet, except for the low hum of engines. Other captives sat along the walls, some human, some alien species he had never seen before. No one spoke much. Fear filled the air like an invisible fog. Kale forced himself to stay calm. Panic would not help him. Humans were good at adapting. That was something he had learned growing up in the outer colonies. When things changed, you changed with them. An alien guard approached, tall and slender, its silver armor reflecting the pale lights of the ship. The guard's eyes glowed faintly blue as it scanned the prisoners. Kale kept his expression neutral. Showing weakness might invite trouble. The guard paused briefly when its gaze reached him. Humans were rare this far into Aurelian territory. Kale could feel the curiosity behind that stare. After a moment, the guard moved on. Hours passed. Or maybe days. Time felt strange inside the ship. Eventually, the vessel slowed, and a deep vibration ran through the floor. The doors opened, and bright light flooded the hold. They had arrived. Outside, the world looked unreal. Massive towers stretched toward a sky filled with floating structures that shimmered like glass. Ships moved silently between platforms, guided by invisible pathways. Everything felt ordered, precise, controlled. The prisoners were led into a large processing hall where officials examined them one by one. Strange devices scanned their bodies, recording information without a single spoken word. When Kale's turn came, a robed alien studied him carefully. "Human," it said in perfect translated speech. "Designation confirmed." The alien tilted its head slightly, as if trying to understand him. "You show no visible fear response." Kale shrugged lightly. "Does it help?" The alien paused, perhaps surprised by the answer. Then it made a small gesture, and data appeared in the air beside it. "Servant asset." The words felt heavy, but Kale kept his face calm. Inside, he felt a sharp sting, a soldier reduced to a label. He was moved again, this time toward a transport shuttle that took him away from the other captives. Through the window, he saw the heart of the city. Endless layers of structures built with elegant curves and glowing surfaces. Unlike human cities, nothing looked rushed or chaotic. Every piece felt like it belonged exactly where it was. Eventually, the shuttle landed inside a vast courtyard surrounded by towering walls. Guards lined the edges, standing perfectly still. At the center rose a structure unlike anything Kale had ever seen. A palace that looked carved from light itself. He realized where he was being taken. The royal palace of the Aurelian Empire. Confusion mixed with caution. Why bring a human prisoner here? Inside, the air smelled faintly sweet, and the floors reflected soft light. Servants moved silently along the corridors, avoiding eye contact. Some glanced at Kale with curiosity, before quickly looking away. A supervisor greeted him, a tall alien wearing layered robes that indicated authority. You will follow palace protocols, the supervisor said calmly. You will observe before acting. You will speak only when necessary. Kale nodded. Understood. He was given simple clothing and assigned a living space. Small but clean. Compared to a prison cell, it felt almost comfortable, but the meaning behind it remained clear. He was not free. Days passed as Kale learned the routines of palace life. He carried supplies, assisted in organizing storage areas, and observed how everything worked with quiet efficiency. The Aurelians valued order above all else. Every action followed a precise pattern. What surprised him most was how little emotion they showed. Conversations were calm, controlled, and often brief. Even disagreements felt distant, like debates rather than arguments. Whispers traveled through the halls. The queen ruled absolutely, yet few had seen her directly. Orders came through advisors and high-ranking officials. Some said she had withdrawn from public appearances long ago. Kale listened more than he spoke. He watched carefully, learning which paths to avoid, which guards were strict, which servants were kind. One evening, he noticed a young palace worker struggling with a heavy container. Without thinking, Kale stepped forward to help. The worker hesitated, surprised, but accepted.
Humans assist without command? The worker asked quietly.
Sometimes, Kale said with a small smile. Word of small moments like that began to spread.
Some servants started greeting him cautiously. Others avoided him, unsure what to think of a human inside the palace. Then came the night. Everything changed. Kyle was organizing supplies when a royal messenger entered the room. The messenger wore dark robes marked with the royal symbol. Every servant nearby froze instantly. The messenger approached Kale directly. You are summoned, it said. Kale straightened slowly.
By whom? The queen. Silence fell across the room.
Every eye turned toward him. Kale felt a wave of disbelief. The queen? Why would she call for him? He followed the messenger through corridors he had never seen before. Guards stepped aside as they passed. The air grew quieter, heavier, as if even sound itself respected the space. They stopped before a massive door sealed with glowing patterns. No one enters without invitation, the messenger said softly. You will go alone. Kale took a slow breath and stepped forward. Inside, the chamber was vast yet peaceful, filled with soft light and flowing shapes that felt almost alive. At the far end stood a figure near a large window overlooking the city. The queen turned slowly. Her presence filled the room, not with fear, but with quiet power. She studied him carefully, her gaze sharp yet curious.
You are the human, she said. Kael inclined his head slightly, unsure of the correct protocol.
Yes. She stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. I requested you. Kale blinked, surprised. Why? He asked before he could stop himself. The queen's eyes seemed to brighten slightly. Because humans are different, she said. And difference is something my empire has forgotten. Kale realized then that this meeting was not a mistake. It was the beginning of something far bigger than he had imagined. Kale stood still as the queen studied him. The silence in the chamber felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning, like the quiet before a storm, or the pause between important words. Outside the large window behind her, the city lights moved slowly, glowing like distant stars. The queen's presence felt calm, yet powerful. She did not rush her movements or her speech. Everything about her felt controlled. But Kale noticed something else beneath that control, a tiredness hidden behind strength. You do not look afraid, she said after a moment. Kael answered honestly. I am careful, not fearless. Her lips curved slightly, as if she appreciated the answer. "That is a very human response," she said. She walked slowly around him, observing him from different angles, as if studying more than his appearance. Cale remained still, unsure whether he was being tested or evaluated. He decided the best choice was to remain honest and calm. "I requested a human because your species behaves differently from most others," she continued. "You adapt quickly. You question rules. You form bonds even when logic suggests distance."
Cale nodded slowly. "Sometimes that helps us survive. And sometimes it causes chaos," she added.
"That too," he admitted. The Queen stopped in front of him again.
"Tell me about Earth. It was not an order. It sounded more like genuine curiosity."
Kyle hesitated for only a moment before speaking. He described Earth as he remembered it. Not just cities and technology, but people. He talked about how humans disagreed, learned, struggled, and changed. He spoke about hope and stubbornness, about how humans often tried again even after failure. The Queen listened carefully, without interrupting. When he finished, she asked, "Why do humans continue when defeat seems certain?" "Because sometimes continuing is the only victory left. And sometimes hope is stronger than logic." She looked away briefly, toward the city. "Hope," she repeated quietly. The conversation continued longer than Cale expected. She asked about human leaders, human friendships, even human humor. Some questions felt strange, but he answered honestly. He noticed that she never mocked or dismissed his answers. Instead, she seemed to compare them with something in her own experience. Finally, she said, "You may leave for now, but you will return." Cale bowed slightly and stepped backward before turning toward the door. As it opened, he felt the weight of many unseen eyes watching him. Outside the chamber, guards stood silently. The messenger from before waited to escort him back. News spread quickly through the palace. By the time Cale returned to his assigned area, everyone already knew. Servants glanced at him with new curiosity. Some looked impressed. Others looked nervous. One older worker approached him carefully. "Is it true?" they whispered.
"You spoke with her directly?"
Cale nodded once. The worker shook their head slowly. No outsider has been called like that before. That night, Cale could not sleep easily. His mind replayed every word of the conversation. The Queen's questions had not felt random. She had been searching for something. The next few days passed quietly, but Cale noticed subtle changes. Guards watched him more closely. Some nobles whispered when he passed. A few high-ranking officials stared openly, their expressions unreadable. During his tasks, he overheard fragments of conversations. Inside the royal chamber, it disrupts tradition. Why would she risk this? Kal-El understood enough to know that his presence was not welcomed by everyone.
Another summons came sooner than he expected.
This time, the messenger arrived during daylight hours. The walk to the royal chamber felt less intimidating, but the tension in the air remained. When Cale entered, the Queen was seated near a table filled with glowing projections. She gestured for him to approach. "You learn quickly," she said without looking up. "I try," Cale replied. She dismissed the projections with a wave of her hand. "I wish to test something."
"Many in my empire believe humans are impulsive and dangerous," she continued. "Yet reports suggest humans also show strong loyalty. We care about each other," Cale said simply. "Care," she repeated, "a concept many in this palace see as weakness. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it is strength." She studied him carefully again. "You speak without fear of disagreement. You asked for honesty."
Another faint smile appeared on her face. She began asking more difficult questions about strategy, decision-making, and leadership. Kale realized she was testing how humans thought during crisis situations. He described how humans often relied on teamwork and flexible plans rather than rigid structures. "You would allow lower-ranking individuals to challenge authority?" she asked. "If it helps everyone survive, yes."
That would be considered disorder here.
But sometimes change looks like disorder before it becomes progress. The Queen fell silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, "My empire faces challenges that cannot be solved by tradition alone." She activated another projection showing distant star systems marked with warning signals. "External threats grow stronger," she explained. "Internal unity grows weaker, yet my council refuses to change." "Why?" Kyle asked. "They believe adaptation equals weakness." Kale thought about human history. On Earth, the strongest groups survived because they changed. She looked at him with new intensity.
That is why you are here. Kale realized then that this was not simply curiosity. She needed something from him.
As he left the chamber again, he felt both honored and uneasy. Later that evening, while walking through a quieter corridor, he sensed someone following him. He turned slightly but saw nothing unusual. Still, the feeling did not disappear. The next day, a storage platform malfunctioned while he worked nearby. A heavy container nearly fell on him. He moved quickly, barely avoiding injury. It could have been an accident, but something felt wrong. From that moment, Kale understood that not everyone wanted him alive. Despite the danger, another summons arrived. During this meeting, the Queen's tone felt more serious. "You are being watched," she said calmly. "I noticed," Kale replied. "I expected resistance." She continued. "Change creates fear." Kyle nodded. "What do you want from me?" She hesitated slightly before answering. "I want to understand humanity's strength," she said, "and perhaps learn from it." For the first time, Kale saw vulnerability behind her royal presence. Their conversation lasted longer than before. They discussed leadership under pressure, trust between strangers, and how humans built alliances even after conflict. As Kale left that night, he realized his role in the palace was changing. He was no longer just a servant. He was becoming something unexpected, someone the Queen trusted, and that trust was beginning to shake the entire empire. Kale's days inside the palace grew more complicated with each passing moment. The corridors that had once seemed orderly and predictable now felt like a maze of whispers, hidden glances, and silent judgment. Every movement he made seemed to ripple through the palace walls. Servants who had once avoided him now watched him carefully. Guards, who had always been strict, began to nod subtly when he passed. And somewhere in the shadows, the nobles whispered. Kale understood that his presence was more dangerous than he had realized. To most of the Aurelian Empire, a human inside the Queen's chambers was a scandal waiting to happen. Few dared to confront him directly, but that did not mean they were harmless. Every minor accident that occurred around him now carried weight. A loose container, a slipping floor panel, a distracted guard. Kale learned to trust nothing and no one, completely. It was during one of these routine days that the first serious warning arrived. Kale was helping coordinate storage deliveries in a lower corridor when he noticed the shadow of a figure moving with purpose. At first he thought it was a servant hurrying, but the movements were too deliberate. Kale froze. He caught the faint glint of a device in the figure's hand. It wasn't something ordinary. It looked like a tool that could easily harm him. Without hesitation, he stepped aside and pressed the container he carried against the wall, hiding it just as the figure passed. A whisper of metal brushed against stone. A near miss that could have been fatal. Kale's heart pounded. For the first time, he realized that being in the Queen's favor was not enough to protect him. There were forces in the palace that wanted him gone. He did not yet understand why, but instinct told him that some nobles viewed his growing influence as a threat. Humans, unpredictable and clever, were dangerous to those who thrived on rigid rules. The Queen's summons came that evening. Kale entered her chamber with caution. The room, still bathed in soft light, seemed calmer than the corridors. The Queen regarded him with her usual calm expression, but Kale could sense a deeper intensity behind her eyes. "You have noticed the tension," she said, without preamble. "Yes," Kale replied. "Some people do not like my presence." "They fear what they do not understand," she said. "Humans are different. They think in ways that unsettle others." Kale nodded slowly. "That is true." The Queen stepped closer, walking along the glowing floor, her robes moving with the elegance of flowing water. "I am aware that my council does not trust you. Some may even wish to harm you." "I suspected that already," Kale said. She paused, staring at him. "Yet you continue to act with honesty and integrity. That is why I requested you." While it was an unusual conversation for someone who had been labeled a mere servant, somehow he had become more than that, a representative of humanity's strength. But it also made him a target. "You understand," she continued, "that what I ask of you may require more than loyalty. It may require courage, ingenuity, and perhaps sacrifice." Kale felt a surge of determination. He had survived battlefields, harsh planets, and countless conflicts. Nothing in his life had prepared him for palace intrigue, but he understood one thing clearly. Humans survived by thinking, by adapting, by trusting each other when others could not. He was ready to show that even here humanity's strengths were real. "I understand," he said simply. The Queen regarded him for a long moment, as though weighing something far beyond words. Then she turned toward a projection of distant star systems, a map filled with blinking lights that marked both allies and threats. "There is a threat to my empire," she said, "one that cannot be ignored. The Council refuses to act because it challenges their beliefs and traditions. They are confident that history and rules alone will protect us. They are wrong." Kyle studied the map, noting the marks that represented fleets, outposts, and supply routes. The scale of it was immense. "It is a big risk," he said. "Yes," the Queen replied. "That is why I need you. I want a perspective they cannot offer." The next days were a blur of preparation. Kyle began to work more closely with the palace's defense units, not as a servant, but as an observer and advisor. He suggested small adjustments that seemed insignificant at first, rearranging patrol routes, reallocating supplies, questioning the rigid chain of command. The officers were skeptical, some even dismissive. But when KL anticipated a logistical problem with a shipment that would have delayed the guard's readiness, he proved his insight. Word began to spread. Some of the nobles whispered in awe. Others glared at him with resentment. Kale noticed patterns forming. Those who embraced his ideas gained small advantages in efficiency. Those who resisted often fell behind, unable to adapt. One night, Kale was summoned again. The Queen spoke more openly now, her voice filled with both urgency and caution. "An attack may come sooner than expected," she said. "I cannot rely on tradition alone."
I need ingenuity, what humans call creativity. Kyle nodded.
"Then we should prepare as if every possibility is real. Humans survive by expecting the unexpected."
She regarded him thoughtfully. "You have survived by being adaptable. That is why I trust you."
Kale realized that trust in her hands carried both power and responsibility.
To fail would mean more than personal danger. It could endanger everyone under her rule. As the week passed, Kale noticed more subtle threats. A minor servant had been nearly injured by a falling crate. A guard had tripped over a rope left carelessly in a corridor. Each incident seemed minor, but Kale's instincts told him they were deliberate. Someone was testing him, pushing him, trying to see his reaction. He spent nights walking quietly through the palace, observing patterns, noting unusual behavior, and speaking in whispers to those he could trust. Slowly, he built a small network of allies, guards who respected him, servants who had seen his honesty, even a few lower-ranking nobles curious enough to listen. One evening, while reviewing maps in a secluded chamber, Kale overheard a conversation that chilled him. Two high-ranking advisors, hidden behind a partition, spoke in urgent tones. "The human has gained too much influence. If he survives this long, the Queen may listen to him over us." "That cannot happen. He must be removed," the other said. Kale realized that his life was in genuine danger. The subtle accidents, the careful whispers, the glances, all of it led to one conclusion. Palace politics were more dangerous than battlefields he had ever faced. He spent the next days carefully planning how to navigate the threats. He moved cautiously, spoke only when necessary, and built trust, quietly. Every small action became both survival and strategy. The Queen, meanwhile, continued to test him. In each meeting, she pushed him to analyze threats, anticipate behavior, and propose solutions. Kale began to see patterns in the Empire's vulnerabilities, old systems failing under stress, rigid traditions creating blind spots, and factions too self-interested to act. He suggested unconventional tactics. He recommended combining smaller fleets in unpredictable ways. He advised granting minor command to those who had shown ingenuity rather than relying solely on rank. Some officers scoffed. Some were impressed. But Kale's reasoning was difficult to dismiss once small successes proved his approach worked. Finally, the moment came that tested him in the truest sense. A warning came from the outer colonies. An enemy fleet had moved close to the Empire's borders. Faster than expected, panic rippled through the palace. High-ranking advisors demanded rigid adherence to plans. Kale was summoned to provide immediate guidance. He stood in the Queen's chamber, observing the projection maps glowing with urgency. He suggested rapid adaptation, assigning resources not by rank, but by skill and location. He proposed flexible patrols and rapid response teams that could move where needed most. The Queen listened carefully, and for the first time, ignored the advice of her usual counsel. Kale realized the weight of trust he carried. The first wave of the attack arrived at dawn. Kale's plans were tested immediately. Small units moved unpredictably, catching the enemy off guard. Guards and soldiers who had doubted him followed orders without hesitation because his strategy gave them confidence. Every adjustment Kale had suggested became crucial in holding the Empire's key positions. When the first threat subsided, Kale stood among the palace guards, sweat dripping from his brow, heart racing from anticipation. He realized that survival here depended on more than physical strength. It depended on foresight, courage, and trust between people. The Queen entered, calm as ever, but her eyes betrayed a hint of relief. "You have performed well," she said. "But this is only the beginning." Kale knew she was right. The threats were growing. Internal politics, rival factions, and external enemies created a web of danger that seemed endless. But he also knew that humans had a way of surviving where others would fail. The qualities that had carried his people through centuries, adaptability, courage, empathy, and ingenuity, were exactly what this empire needed. As the city below began to settle after the attack, Kale stood on the balcony of the chamber, looking out at the horizon. He thought about the challenges ahead, the people watching him, and the trust he had earned from a queen who had seen centuries of rule and still found value in a human outsider. For the first time in his life, Kyle understood that being human was not weakness. It was a kind of power that few recognized, and now in this vast alien empire, it could save lives, perhaps even civilizations. The night air carried a strange tension, even within the palace walls. Kale could feel it as he moved through the corridors, the soft hum of lights above blending with distant alarms. He had learned to trust his instincts. And tonight, they screamed that something was about to happen. The enemy fleet which the Queen had warned about was closer than anyone had expected. Their ships had moved silently, faster than predicted, and now they hovered just beyond the protective shields of the city. Inside the palace, every noble and officer had been alerted. The Queen stood calmly in her chamber, overlooking the glowing cityscape through the tall windows. Her presence was commanding, yet there was a tension in her shoulders that betrayed the weight of what was to come. Kale entered quietly, carrying the reports he had compiled. His own heart raced, but he kept his expression neutral. "The fleet has arrived earlier than expected," he said. "They are attacking multiple points along the outer perimeter. If we do not respond quickly, key sectors could fall before reinforcements arrive." The Queen studied the maps he laid out on the glowing table. She did not rush to speak, allowing him to continue. "I have proposed deploying flexible units rather than rigid formations. Patrols will intercept at weak points, while mobile squads respond to breaches. Rigid chain of command will slow response times. Human strategies favor adaptability and speed." Some of the advisors murmured among themselves. A few high-ranking officers shook their heads, unconvinced. Kale felt the tension rise in the room. Many believed humans could not understand the discipline and structure necessary to defend an empire of this size. The Queen raised her hand, silencing the room. "We will follow his plan. All units execute as he advises. Adapt where necessary, but trust in the human perspective." Her voice was calm, yet carried an authority that demanded obedience. Even the doubting nobles fell silent. Kale barely had time to breathe before the first alarms blared through the palace. Observation panels lit up, showing enemy ships approaching in multiple waves. Explosions shook the perimeter, and the hum of defensive systems went into overdrive. Kale moved quickly, directing units, sending messages, and advising on adjustments. His mind raced, thinking several steps ahead while keeping an eye on the city below. The first wave of enemy ships broke through the outer shields. Kale watched as the defensive units responded in unpredictable patterns. The human strategy demanded flexibility, and for a moment, chaos seemed to overtake order. But then Kale saw the results. Enemy attacks were deflected, their formations scattered, and key sectors remained intact. The soldiers followed his guidance, trusting his decisions, even when they went against their instincts. A massive explosion rocked the lower city. Kale heard shouts and alarms echoing through the palace corridors. He ran toward the source, seeing a squad trapped by a damaged energy barrier. Using a rapid improvisation technique he had suggested earlier, Kale directed nearby units to form a temporary human-constructed bridge of support, allowing the trapped soldiers to escape. For the first time, some of the doubting officers watched in awe. Humans could think differently, and that difference could save lives. The enemy launched a second, heavier wave. Ships moved with coordinated precision, attempting to strike at the palace directly. Kale realized this was the real test. If the palace fell, the Queen's rule and the empire itself would be in jeopardy. He directed countermeasures, instructing smaller units to bait enemy forces, while others struck at weak points in their formation. His plan relied not on superior firepower, but on adaptability, timing, and trust. As the battle escalated, Kale noticed one of the outer gates under direct attack, a massive vessel aimed to breach the palace's defenses, its energy weapons glowing ominously. Kale ran to the command station, coordinating rapid-fire counterattacks. He directed drones to intercept, mobile units to flank, and reserve squads to reinforce where necessary. Every decision required quick thinking, and every delay could be fatal. The Queen appeared behind him, calm as ever.
"Your approach works," she said. "The enemy is responding to our unpredictability."
They do not understand it. Kyle nodded without turning. They are used to rigid strategy. We are not predictable. The enemy vessel attempted to adapt, sending reinforcements to breach the palace perimeter. Kale anticipated this, redirecting units before the attack reached critical sectors. Explosions lit up the sky as drones and mobile squads engaged, breaking apart the enemy formations. Soldiers who had doubted Kale earlier now moved with confidence, trusting his decisions completely. Then came a critical moment. A massive energy cannon from the enemy ship locked onto the central palace. If it fired, the explosion could destroy the Queen's chambers. Kale knew he had only seconds to act. He directed a diversion, sending a smaller fleet to draw the cannon's fire, while mobile units moved to disable the targeting system. The plan was risky. Failure meant death. The cannon fired. A brilliant beam cut through the sky, striking empty space where the diversion fleet had moved. At the same moment, Kale's units reached the targeting system, disrupting the energy feed and causing the cannon to overheat. Smoke and sparks erupted, and the vessel faltered, unable to complete its attack. Kale exhaled sharply, feeling the weight lift slightly. The palace and the Queen were safe, for now, but the battle was not over. Waves of enemy ships continued to approach, each requiring attention, each demanding decisions faster than humans were naturally capable of making. Kale relied on the instincts honed from Earth's battlefields, but the scale of this conflict was unlike anything he had ever seen. Hours passed. Explosions shook the horizon. Smoke and debris filled the sky, lit by the glow of energy weapons. Kale moved from station to station, coordinating, adjusting, and anticipating. He watched as human-inspired strategies succeeded again and again, turning the tide of battle. The enemy faltered under pressure, unable to predict the flexible defense. Finally, near dawn, the enemy fleet began to retreat. Their formations were broken, their ships damaged and scattered. The palace had survived, the Queen remained unharmed, and the city stood intact. Kale's exhaustion weighed heavily, but there was a satisfaction in knowing that adaptability, courage, and trust had won the day. The Queen called Kale to her chambers. She did not speak immediately, only studying him carefully. Her gaze carried respect, acknowledgement, and perhaps even relief. "You have done more than I expected," she said. "Not only did you save lives, but you demonstrated qualities that my empire has forgotten. Courage, creativity, and loyalty. Humanity's strength is unlike anything I have witnessed in centuries of rule." Kale bowed, feeling the exhaustion in his bones. "I only did what humans have always done. Adapt and survive."
She nodded slowly.
"And yet, few would have had the courage to act as you did. Your presence here has changed the way I view not only humans, but the future of my empire."
The palace was quiet after the battle.
Soldiers and officers moved with cautious energy, tending to repairs, assisting injured civilians, and securing the perimeter. Whispers of Kale's actions spread quickly. Humans were no longer seen as weak or unpredictable. Instead, they were respected for qualities that even the most rigid Aurelian officers could not replicate. Kale walked through the corridors, observing the aftermath. Servants nodded to him with newfound respect. Guards acknowledged his guidance. Even a few skeptical nobles approached quietly, seeking to understand his strategies. Kale realized that trust and courage had created allies where suspicion had ruled before. The Queen joined him on the balcony, overlooking the city now bathed in the soft light of dawn. She was silent for a long time, her eyes scanning the horizon. Finally, she spoke. "Today the Empire survived because humans think differently, because humans act when others hesitate, because humans care for one another in ways we often forget." Kale nodded. "Caring is not weakness, it is strength." "It is a strength I will remember, and I will ensure the Empire remembers it as well."
In the days that followed, Kale's position in the palace changed quietly but irrevocably.
He was no longer a simple servant or observer. The Queen consulted him on decisions, asked for advice on strategy, and even encouraged officers to consider human perspectives in planning. The once skeptical council began to adapt, slowly accepting that the human way of thinking had value. Kale reflected on his journey, from a captured soldier to a trusted advisor. He had survived, not through superior weapons or brute force, but through qualities that humans had always carried: adaptability, ingenuity, courage, and empathy. In the Aurelian Empire, these traits had turned the tide of battle and saved lives. One quiet evening, Kale stood in the royal garden. The sky was clear, stars glimmering in patterns that reminded him of home. The queen joined him silently. They watched the city together, peaceful for the first time since the attack. "You have changed more than the Empire," she said softly. "You have changed me as well." Kale smiled. "Perhaps humanity has more to offer than you thought." She turned toward him, her expression one of respect and quiet admiration. "Yes, and now the Empire can learn from it, and perhaps survive because of it." As Kael looked at the horizon, he realized that being human was not a limitation. It was a gift that could survive in the harshest battles, in the most dangerous political intrigue, and even in an empire that had long forgotten what it meant to trust, to adapt, and to care. Humanity had won, not just the day, but a place in a world far larger than Earth, a world that had learned, finally, that humans were a force unlike any other.